Picture this. A young man sits down to read a book. The room is quiet. The story begins to unfold. But just as he is settling into the rhythm of the words, his phone buzzes. A notification flashes across the screen. A friend has posted a photo. An app is reminding him of a sale. A news alert screams of yet another crisis. The book remains open, but his mind has already shifted. The thread of thought is broken. What could have been a deep engagement dissolves into scattered attention. This is not an isolated moment. It is the texture of modern life. Smartphones deliver a constant stream of microstimuli, each one tugging at our focus, fragmenting our awareness. In theory, this flood of stimulation should enrich us. In practice, it leaves us restless, unable to sustain the kind of concentrated attention that depth demands. Friedrich Nietzsche once warned that an overstimulated mind loses its ability to digest experience. He compared the modern intellect to someone who eats constantly, but never allows the body time to absorb nourishment. To become wise, he suggested, is to learn the art of slow digestion. Wisdom requires patience, silence, and the ability to stay with a thought long enough for it to transform us. But our phones are not designed for digestion. They are designed for endless consumption. Every notification, every reel, every headline is a small spark of novelty, and novelty is addictive. Neuroscience shows that each time we encounter something new, our brain releases a small dose of dopamine, the same chemical that fuels gambling. It feels good, but it keeps us hungry, always reaching for the next hit. The result? Our mental landscape begins to look like a shattered mirror, full of fragments, but no reflection. We can't finish a book. We skim articles instead of reading them. Even conversations suffer, broken by glances at glowing screens. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who studied the state of flow, that immersion where creativity and excellence thrive, noted that deep focus is the root of human flourishing. Yet, flow requires sustained attention, free from interruption. The smartphone, with its endless buzzing and flashing, systematically erodes our ability to enter this state. Think about it this way. Human beings once had long stretches of silence built into their lives. Farmers worked fields with only the sound of wind and birds. Writers sat in candlelight with ink and thought. Even boredom, once seen as a curse, gave birth to creativity because it forced the mind to wander inward. Now, boredom is almost extinct. Every empty moment is instantly filled by a glowing screen. And in the extinction of boredom, we may also be killing imagination. Nietzsche feared that the age of newspapers was creating nervous, hurried, shallow souls. What would he say about TikTok? And there, the thin scroll of Instagram. Perhaps he would say, we have reached the climax of overstimulation, a world in which thinking itself is becoming endangered. But here lies the challenge. The mind cannot be both constantly stimulated and deeply thoughtful. We must choose. Do we want to be consumers of fragments or creators of meaning? The soft power of the smartphone is that it teaches us impatience. We demand speed, fast food, fast news, fast entertainment. Yet the deepest things in life, wisdom, love, beauty, even self-understanding, cannot be rushed. They grow slowly, like trees. They ask us to linger, to dwell, to resist the flicker of distraction. So perhaps we must relearn the lost art of slowness, to deliberately set aside the buzzing screen, to allow the mind to stretch into silence, to read without rushing, to think without interruption. The question I leave you with here is simple. When was the last time you allowed your mind to be bored, to wander freely without reaching for your phone? For in boredom lies the doorway to depth, and without depth, we risk becoming the most overstimulated and therefore the most thoughtless generation in history. And if reflections like these resonate with you, consider subscribing. Each week, we explore the questions our age most needs, but most fears to ask. We began with a paradox, device smaller than a book, capable of giving us access to all the knowledge of humanity, may be creating one of the most distracted, shallow, and fragile generations in history. And yet, like all paradoxes, the truth is more complex. Smartphones are not evil in themselves. They are tools, astonishingly powerful ones. The danger lies not only in the device, but in the ways it reshapes our minds, our relationships, our desires, and our very sense of self. Across this journey, we have uncovered 6 insights, 6 warnings, but also 6 opportunities for reflection. First, we saw that smartphones give us the illusion of infinite knowledge, while quietly weakening real understanding. Access is not wisdom. True knowledge requires struggle, memory, and depth. Second, we explored how endless stimulation destroys the depth of thought. The constant buzzing and scrolling fragments attention, leaving us restless and shallow. Depth demands patience, silence, and the courage to resist novelty. Third, we recognize that connection without presence breeds loneliness. Our devices promise intimacy, but often deliver only shadows of it. True connection requires presence, the willingness to put the phone down and meet another soul unfiltered. Fourth, we confronted the reality that the architecture of control shapes our desires. Smartphones are not neutral. They are designed to manipulate, surveil, and sell. Awareness is the first act of resistance, and reclaiming our desires is the path back to freedom. Fifth, we saw that comparison culture corrupts the soul. Endlessly measuring ourselves against curated illusions breeds envy and despair. To live authentically, we must step out of the distorted mirror and root ourselves in our own path. And sixth, we remembered that the forgotten art of silence is the path back to wisdom. In stillness, the soul speaks. Without silence, we lose the inner life that makes us truly human. Taken together, these insights are not only critiques, but also invitations. They ask us to pause, to see clearly, and to choose differently. Because the question is not simply, are smartphones making us stupid? The question is deeper. Will we allow them to shape us into passive, shallow, and distracted beings? Or will we reclaim our ability to think, to feel, to live with presence and depth? The choice is ours, and it is urgent. You and I are not passive victims of technology. We are participants in its story. Each time we pick up the phone, we can either surrender our attention to the endless scroll, or we can hold it with intention. Each moment of silence reclaimed, each conversation protected, each act of gratitude practiced. These are not small things. They are acts of rebellion against a culture of distraction. Perhaps the true mark of wisdom in this century will not be how much information we can access, but how much we can resist, how deeply we can think, how fully we can love, how courageously we can dwell in silence when the world is screaming for our attention. So let me leave you with this challenge. The next time you reach for your phone, Pause. Ask yourself, am I reaching for this out of intention or out of habit? Am I using it as a tool or is it using me? Because if we can answer that question honestly and choose presence over distraction, silence over noise, authenticity over comparison, then perhaps we will not be the most stupid generation in history. Perhaps we will be the first to awaken within the glowing trap and to reclaim the gift of being fully human in an age that wants us to forget. If this reflection has stirred something in you, I invite you to stay with us on this journey. Subscribe if you feel called and share your thoughts in the comments, because these conversations are not meant to end here. They are part of a larger search for wisdom that we walk together. And perhaps, one day, when the noise of the world grows too loud, we will remember that wisdom begins not in our phones, but in the quiet courage of a human soul willing to listen. There is a sound many people no longer hear: silence. Think about it. When was the last time you sat without music, without podcasts, without scrolling, without even the soft hum of a notification nearby? For many of us, silence feels unnatural now, almost threatening. We reach for our phones not because we have something urgent to do, but because we fear the quiet space that opens when nothing is happening. And yet, it is precisely in silence that wisdom is born. Carl Jung believed that each of us carries within a deep inner life the unconscious, filled with images, archetypes, and forgotten truths about who we are. But this inner life speaks softly. To hear it requires stillness. Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams; who looks inside, awakes." Smartphones make it almost impossible to look inside. Every idle moment is filled. We no longer wait in line. We scroll. We no longer sit with our thoughts. We distract ourselves with news, videos, games. The smallest pause becomes intolerable, and so the inner voice, already faint, is drowned completely. But here lies the tragedy. When we avoid silence, we avoid ourselves. We silence not just boredom, but also reflection, imagination, prayer, creativity, and the subtle stirrings of the soul. Without silence, we cannot integrate experience. We cannot grow. Throughout history, the wisest minds have sought silence deliberately. The Stoics practiced stillness each morning. Monks retreated into deserts and forests. Philosophers like Heidegger described deep thinking as a kind of dwelling, not rushing but staying with a thought until it revealed its depths. Even in modern psychology, research shows that moments of quiet rest allow the brain to consolidate memories, form insights, and regulate emotion. Silence, then, is not emptiness. It is nourishment. It is the soil in which wisdom grows. But here is the paradox of our time. We have built technologies that make silence rare. Notifications clamor for attention. Algorithms scream for engagement. Noise has become the background of existence. And in this constant hum, we risk becoming shallow, restless, unable to hear the deeper music of life. To resist is an act of courage. It might look like turning off the phone for an hour each day, walking without headphones, sitting in a room with nothing but your thoughts. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Silence exposes us to our doubts, our fears, our longings. But over time, that discomfort becomes the doorway to clarity. Perhaps wisdom in the smartphone age begins not with learning more, but with listening more deeply, not with consuming information, but with creating space for the soul to speak. So I leave you with a question: when the noise falls away, what do you hear inside yourself? Because in rediscovering silence, we may find again the very thing that makes us human, the ability to reflect, to imagine, and to live with depth in a shallow age. Picture this: a young woman wakes up in the morning, reaches for her phone, and begins to scroll. She sees a friend's vacation in Greece, another's promotion at work, a classmate's perfect wedding photos. With each image, she feels a small pang inside. By the end of 10 minutes, her mood has shifted. She feels behind, inadequate, strangely less alive than the smiling faces on her screen. This is the quiet cruelty of the smartphone. It turns our lives into constant comparison, and comparison, left unchecked, corrodes the soul. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century pessimist philosopher, wrote that envy is one of the most destructive emotions because it not only makes us suffer, but also poisons our ability to feel joy for others. To envy, he said, is to inflict pain on ourselves for no reason other than the existence of another's happiness. In his bleak honesty, Schopenhauer argued that envy was almost inevitable in human life. But what would he say about a world in which envy is not just occasional, but engineered into the very structure of daily experience? Because make no mistake, the architecture of social media is designed to provoke comparison. Feeds are curated, highlight reels, polished illusions of life. We rarely see the loneliness, the failures, the quiet disappointments. Instead, we are presented with endless parades of vacations, achievements, and filtered beauty. The mind, fragile as it is, compares relentlessly. Why not me? Why not yet? Why not better? Psychology confirms what Schopenhauer intuited: comparison is corrosive. Studies show that time spent on social media correlates strongly with increased anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem, especially among young people. The more we scroll, the worse we feel. Not because others are malicious, but because envy is the natural outcome of constant exposure to curated perfection. Even worse, smartphones collapse the boundaries of context. A teenager in a small town compares themselves not to their classmates, but to global celebrities. A young man struggling in his career measures himself not against peers, but against billionaires flaunting success online. The result is a distorted mirror that always shows us smaller, poorer, uglier, less worthy than someone else. Here's the irony: envy thrives on appearances, but appearances are precisely what social media exaggerates. We are envying illusions, shadows, performances, and yet our emotions respond as though they are real. We suffer from ghosts, but there is a deeper spiritual cost. Comparison makes it almost impossible to live one's own life authentically. When we measure ourselves constantly against others, we cease to ask, "What do I truly want?" Instead, we begin chasing what looks impressive, what will photograph well, what will gather approval. The soul becomes bent outward, always seeking validation, rather than rooted inward, seeking truth. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once warned, "He who looks to others for models will never find joy." True contentment, he argued, comes from aligning life with one's own nature, not with the shifting standards of society. In our smartphone age, this wisdom is radical. To step away from comparison is to step away from the entire economy of likes, shares, and follows. It is an act of liberation. So how do we resist? One way is to practice gratitude, not as a cliche, but as a discipline, to deliberately attend to what is ours, rather than what is missing. Another is to curate our digital diet, unfollowing sources of envy, choosing instead to engage with voices that nourish rather than corrode. And perhaps most powerfully, we can limit the time we spend staring into the distorted mirror altogether. The guiding question for this insight is haunting but necessary. Am I living my life, or am I merely competing in someone else's performance? Because if we allow the smartphone to become the stage upon which envy endlessly plays, our souls will corrode from within, and we will never discover the quiet joy of living authentically. Let's imagine a man walking through a city at night. He believes he is free, choosing where to go, what to see, what to do. But the streets are lit in certain places and dark in others. Signs point him toward shops and restaurants. Surveillance cameras quietly watch from above. His path, though seemingly his own, has been subtly guided by an invisible architecture of control. This is what our smartphones do to us. We imagine that when we scroll, tap, and search, we are freely choosing, but in truth, our desires are being shaped by forces we rarely see. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, devoted much of his work to showing how power does not always operate through force. Instead, it seeps invisibly into the structures of daily life. Schools, prisons, hospitals, laws, technologies. These systems quietly teach us what to value, how to behave, even what to desire. The smartphone is perhaps the most perfect example of such a system. Consider how apps are designed. The infinite scroll is not accidental. It is engineered to keep you hooked, denying you a natural stopping point. Notifications are painted red, the color of urgency and danger, to command your attention. Algorithms track your behavior, learning what seduces you, then feeding you more of it, until your desires no longer feel entirely your own. It is a digital panopticon, Foucault's metaphor for a prison where inmates are watched by an unseen guard. In the panopticon, prisoners begin to police themselves, changing their behavior because they might be watched. On our phones, we are both prisoner and guard. We curate our images, filter our words, and measure our worth through likes, because we know we are being seen. Even when no one is watching, the possibility of the gaze controls us. The disturbing truth is that smartphones are not neutral tools. They are profit-driven ecosystems, designed by corporations whose business model is your attention. As the tech ethicist Tristan Harris has observed, if you are not paying for the product, you are the product. Your clicks, your time, your desires, all harvested, refined, and sold. What does this mean for us as individuals? It means that the smartphone is not just a mirror of our choices, but a sculptor of them. You may believe you are freely choosing to watch that next video, to buy that product, to chase that trend, but often the architecture of your digital environment has already made the choice more likely for you. Here we must pause and ask if my desires are being shaped by algorithms. How free am I really? Philosophers have long debated the nature of freedom. For the Stoics, freedom was inner mastery, the ability to govern one's passions rather than be governed by them. In that sense, the smartphone age threatens to enslave us, not with chains, but with pleasures, not with oppression, but with convenience. The most dangerous prisons are the ones we don't notice, and the smartphone, glowing warmly in our hands, feels less like a cell and more like a friend. Yet if we are not careful, it can quietly become the architect of our desires, leaving us mistaking manipulation for freedom. To resist, we must learn to see the architecture, to recognize that our feeds are not reality, but curated illusions, to notice how often our choices are nudges designed by unseen hands. Awareness is the first step to reclaiming freedom. The guiding question here is unsettling. Do I truly desire what I desire, or have I been taught to? Imagine walking into a cafe on a busy afternoon. Every table is full, groups of friends laughing, couples sipping coffee, students working on laptops. On the surface, the room is alive with conversation and company. Yet if you look closely, you notice something strange. Most people's eyes are fixed not on each other, but on the glowing rectangles in their hands. The cafe is crowded, but each person is in a way alone. This is the paradox of our time. Smartphones connect us to thousands of people instantly, friends, family, even strangers across the world. And yet, surveys show that loneliness is rising to historic levels, especially among the young. How can it be that in the most connected age, so many feel more isolated than ever before? Jean-Jacques Rousseau, writing in the 18th century, might have seen this coming. He argued that modern society alienates us from our authentic selves. Instead of living simply and directly, we become trapped in appearances, comparing ourselves constantly with others, performing for approval, measuring our worth by external signs. Sound familiar? The smartphone, with its endless feeds of filtered lives and performative updates, is Rousseau's nightmare made real. Consider the nature of digital connection. When you send a text, scroll a feed, or like a photo, you are engaging with a shadow of presence, a trace of another person, not their living reality. There is no eye contact, no body language, no silence shared in comfort. It is a simulation of intimacy, not intimacy itself. Psychologists call this social snacking, small bites of interaction that give the illusion of connection, but do not satisfy the deeper hunger for belonging. The result is a kind of emotional malnutrition, like eating sugar instead of a meal. Digital connection gives us a quick rush, but leaves us empty. We mistake visibility for friendship, comments for conversation, followers for community. But when the screen goes dark, we often find ourselves lonelier than before. Think about it. When was the last time you had a truly uninterrupted, face-to-face conversation without glancing at your phone? These moments, once ordinary, have become rare treasures. Smartphones constantly interrupt our presence with one another. A buzzing notification at dinner can fracture intimacy. A glance at a screen can silently signal, "You are not enough to hold my attention." Over time, these fractures accumulate and relationships weaken. The philosopher Martin Buber once distinguished between two ways of relating, I-thou and I-it. In the I-thou relationship, we meet the other as a full person, whole, unique, alive. In the I-it relationship, we reduce the other to an object, a means to an end. Smartphones subtly push us toward I-it encounters. People become avatars, profiles, data points, sources of validation. Presence dissolves into performance. But here is the deeper tragedy. Loneliness is not merely the absence of others, but the absence of being fully present with others. One can be surrounded by friends and still feel invisible if every gaze is divided by a screen. So what is the way forward? Perhaps it begins with reclaiming presence. Something as simple as putting the phone away during a meal, walking without headphones, sitting in silence with another human being. These are acts of quiet rebellion in an age of distraction. For in true presence, loneliness begins to heal. The question we must ask ourselves is this: am I really connecting, or am I only performing the gestures of connection? The smartphone promises companionship, but often delivers solitude dressed as company. To resist this, we must learn again how to be present, because connection without presence is not connection at all. Studies have shown that when people know information will be stored somewhere externally, whether in a notebook, a cloud drive, or on Google, they are less likely to commit it to memory. Why bother learning deeply when you can always just look it up? But here is the hidden cost. Knowledge is not just about storing facts, it is about weaving them into a living fabric of meaning. A surgeon cannot perform an operation by Googling the steps mid-surgery. A poet does not create by glancing at Wikipedia. True knowledge becomes part of us. It is embodied, digested, lived, and that requires slowness, repetition, even struggle, all the things the smartphone teaches us to avoid. The danger is that we begin to treat wisdom as something consumable, like fast food. We snack on information, scrolling through headlines, swiping through factoids, consuming content without digestion. Our minds are filled with fragments, trivia, quotes, statistics, but these fragments do not add up to depth. They create a glittering surface of intelligence beneath which lies hollowness. Nietzsche once remarked that modern humanity risks becoming a leaf blown by every wind. Without the ability to hold ideas deeply, we become susceptible to the shifting storms of trends, memes, propaganda. We can access everything, but understand nothing. Think about how many times you've read something online only to forget it within the hour. The smartphone, by offering us instant access, steals from us the discipline of remembrance, and without remembrance, there is no wisdom. So how do we resist? Perhaps we must return to something ancient. The art of memorization, once central to philosophy and poetry, trained the mind to hold knowledge as part of the soul, not as a file in an external device. Even something as simple as learning a poem by heart or reflecting deeply on a single idea until it takes root can be an act of resistance against the shallowness of smartphone knowledge. The question we must ask ourselves is this: do I truly know, or do I merely know how to find? In this first insight, the warning is clear. The smartphone gives us the illusion of infinite wisdom while weakening our capacity for understanding. To live wisely in this age, we must remember that information is not wisdom and access is not mastery. There is a quiet tragedy unfolding in our hands. A device smaller than a book, lighter than a fruit, is capable of giving us access to the sum of all human knowledge. Yet more often than not, it leaves us empty, distracted, and strangely powerless. The paradox is painful. We live in an age where information is infinite, yet wisdom feels scarce. We have never been more connected, yet so many feel more alone than ever before. It is tempting to believe that progress always means improvement, that every new invention lifts humanity a little higher. But history and philosophy tell a more complicated story. The tools we create do not simply serve us, they shape us, and sometimes they diminish us. Socrates, over 2,000 years ago, feared the invention of writing itself. He believed that by putting words on paper, memory would decay and people would mistake the appearance of knowledge for true understanding. He could not have imagined TikTok, but his warning sounds strangely prophetic. Similarly, Friedrich Nietzsche once observed that when human beings are given too much stimulation, they lose the ability to digest it. Thought becomes shallow, fragmented, incapable of depth. This raises a troubling question. Have smartphones, the miracle machines of our time, begun to create a generation that confuses information with wisdom, stimulation with meaning, and convenience with freedom? That is the question we will explore in this journey together. Not to scold, not to despair, but to understand. Because if we can see clearly the ways this small glowing screen reshapes our mind, we can begin to resist its worst effects and recover something precious, the ability to think deeply, to live consciously, and to be fully human in an age that wants us to scroll mindlessly. Across this video, we will unravel 6 insights drawn from philosophy, psychology, and real life that reveal how smartphones may indeed be creating the most distracted, shallow, and fragile generation in history, but also how, with awareness, we can reclaim our minds